So welcome to everyone joining us today for this program, Brexit, China-EU Relations and Implications for the United States. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Susan Elliott, and I'm the President and CEO of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. And we're really pleased today to have Ambassador Declan Kelleher with us to talk about not only Brexit, but China-EU relations, two subjects which I've told him that many of our members and friends are very interested in. Before we start, I just wanted to also let you know that today's program is not only sponsored by the National Committee on American Foreign Policy, but we are partnering with Yale University's program on Peace and Development, which is led by Bonnie Weir and Hira Jaffe. So this is going to be the first in a series of programs that we will hold jointly on Northern Ireland, on the effects of Brexit on the island of Ireland, and other economic and political issues that are related not only to Northern Ireland, but to the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. There will be more details to follow about our series of programs, but we're very much looking forward to partnering with Bonnie and Hira and Yale University on this very important topic. So on to our today's program, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Ambassador Declan Kelleher. And I think he's very well placed to talk about the two issues that we're interested in discussing. He was the permanent representative of Ireland to the European Union in Brussels from September 2013 to March of 2020. So for those of you who follow, the Great Britain's exit from the European Union, he was there in the thick of things. And in that role, he was responsible for the government of Ireland's frontline promotion and representation of Ireland's policies and interest in the EU, including Ireland's unique position, which we all know because they're the only country of the European Union who share a border with the UK, and also their interests and priorities in the crucial negotiations between the EU and the UK, which led to Britain's withdrawal from the European Union in January 2020. And prior to his appointment to the, to the EU, he was Ireland's ambassador to the People's Republic of China. And that was from 2004 to 2013. So he was there for a good period of time, and we're very much looking forward to hearing his thoughts on the relationship between China and the European Union. But he's no stranger to the United States either. He also served at the Irish Embassy in Washington, and he served earlier in his career in Brussels at the European Union. So we are very much looking forward to hearing from Ambassador Kelleher today. So anyway, Ambassador, welcome. And thank you for taking the time to have a discussion with NCAFP and Yale University's friends and members. And, I would probably like to start out with the European Union, and then we'll go into EU-China relations, because from our point of view, I think trying to understand perhaps what's going on in the European Union and the effect of the departure of the United Kingdom and what that means for the European Union. And we do know that even though Britain officially left the European Union in January of this year, there are still lots of negotiations going on. And it seems as though, a week or so ago that there had been a final agreement arranged, but now there seems to be a stalemate. So I wonder if you could just maybe start out with giving us an update on, what's happening and, how the process is or isn't moving forward.
Let me.
I think you're on mute, or you put.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Sorry, my apologies. I pressed the wrong button. Well, first of all, Susan, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and it is a great pleasure and a privilege and an honor for me to have the opportunity to speak to the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and also, of course, Yale. So I want to thank both you and your colleagues in the National Committee, and also Bonnie and her colleagues in Yale for giving me this opportunity. This seminar is taking place at an important time because you're absolutely right. The UK left the European Union and is in a transition period which ends in just 2 months, ends at the end of this year. The UK had the opportunity under the withdrawal treaty to extend the so-called transition period, but they chose not to. So we're now up against the clock. And as you rightly said, the discussions have been slow. We reached a kind of an impasse, I say about 10 days or so ago. And some of this, and I'll be quite honest on this, some of this I see as domestic British theatre, that a number of problems were referred to, which in fact weren't really problems at all, such as the need for both sides to move. Of course, both sides have to move. There was a strange condition put down by the UK that the European Union should recognise the UK as a sovereign equal. But of course, Article 2 of the UN Charter provides that every member state of the UN recognises the principle of sovereign equality of states. So it was a kind of a bit of a straw man. And my sense is this was a little bit of domestic theatre, so that Boris Johnson could, in some sense, say to his own grassroots that he'd reset things, that we had a new day one, and we could now move ahead. And sure enough, talks began exactly a week ago. And this will, in a sense, be the final, I think, chapter of the talks. They're focusing on the same core issues that have been in play for a while. Let me go through them very briefly. First of all, what's called the level playing field and state aids, which is essentially to ensure no distortions of trade and no unfair advantages. This applies to greater or lesser extents to all of the agreements the European Union has. For example, it applies to agreements with Canada and Japan. It's less salient in those cases because they're so far away and their economies are not as, well, the Japanese economy is bigger, but Canada's economy is not as big, but they're far away. The second point is what's called governance and dispute settlement. This is important again because it's critical to ensure that there's a possibility that standards and principles are adhered to. And this would apply in areas such as workability of an agreement and also the read across to the withdrawal agreement to the Protocol in Northern Ireland that I'll come to in a minute. And let me be frank, the recent decision by the British government to, if you like, withdraw or resile from certain provisions of the withdrawal agreement through their internal market bill in the House of Commons, which I'm sure you heard about, led to a considerable spike in mistrust by a large number of EU member states, including EU member states who wouldn't necessarily have been following Brexit so closely. So EU member states are a bit on their guard now on this, that they did not like what they saw in the House of Commons. And this has become an issue that's become rather more difficult than it would have been. And frankly, again, my own view is that this tactic backfired on Boris Johnson and his government. The third element is fish, which is intensely political as always. Even in EU-US relations, just a couple of months ago, there was a positive mood when the former trade commissioner gave an agreement to access from Maine lobster. And that went down well in certain parts of the US administration and in certain fishing communities on the East Coast of the US. So fish is always political. Then there are a few other issues which are tricky, but probably soluble. Climate change is one. The European Union have been a bit surprised at the lack of ambition by the British in that area, particularly as the British will chair at Glasgow a major summit on climate change next year. But this will include issues such as carbon pricing and emissions trading. But this issue again plays back into the question of level playing field. That there are no kind of unfair advantages and no distortions. So that's a brief overview of where things are. The three key issues, as I say, are the level playing field question, allied to the so-called subsidies or state aids issue. Secondly, governance, which, as I say, has become more difficult than it should have been. And that's a reaction to the British decision on not applying aspects of the withdrawal agreement. And third is fish. The other point I would say is that, and I think it's important, I'm sure everybody understands this, but the withdrawal agreement and the protocol in Northern Ireland, which forms part of the withdrawal agreement, are legally and substantively quite distinct from the negotiations on the future relationship, because the withdrawal agreement is a treaty, a binding treaty that's already in force. Mm-hmm. It came into force shortly after the UK actually left the European Union at the start of this year. And the point I'm making there is that the provisions in relation to Northern Ireland, where there's a rather inventive solution which avoids a border on the island of Ireland, which is crucial to the Good Friday Agreement working well, and introduces checks on the east-west, if you say the ports between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. That is something which elements in the British government clearly were uncomfortable with, but that treaty, Boris Johnson signed up to that. It's a treaty, it's in force, and it has to be made work. That is not part of the current discussions on the main issues I mentioned, the Michel Barnier discussions with David Frost on the British side. That's taking place in a separate framework called the Joint Committee, which was set up by the withdrawal agreement between a senior British minister, Michael Gove, and a senior vice president of the European Commission, Mr. Šefčovič. There are issues, and they have been tricky, but recently there's been a certain degree of, I think, at least the potential for forward movement. The British are moving on the need to ensure infrastructure at the ports in Northern Ireland. They had objected to an office of the European Union in Belfast, but they've now agreed to the presence of EU customs officials who would work with British customs officials to make the crucial determination that's in the treaty, and that's a responsibility of the Joint Committee to decide which goods are at risk and which aren't. Let me give you a practical example of that, if I may. Sugar and steel. Sugar that goes from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and ends up in the sugar bowls on dinner tables of houses in Northern Ireland is fine. But the sugar that goes in as an ingredient to a factory making soda drinks that is then exported on to, say, the rest of Ireland and the EU would attract tariffs. That's a simple example of the kind of issues that have to be addressed. In steel, it's something similar. If the steel goes into tinned beans made and consumed in Northern Ireland, fine. If the steel goes into products that are exported into the EU, that implies tariffs. So they're the kinds of issues that have to be dealt with. They are fairly technical issues. They're certainly not renegotiation of the withdrawal agreement, but they do require consistent and fairly serious efforts to make them work. And again, that's why the kind of introduction of this disapplication of the withdrawal agreement caused so much concern among some member states of the European Union. It caused us concern too in Ireland as well. But what we want to do is we want to see the deal. We want to see a deal working. We fully support Michel Barnier and the EU negotiating team. Crucial for us is a solution that's to the benefit not only of Ireland, but also Northern Ireland, and also critically, Susan, a solution that respects the European single market, because we do not want to see a position where, because of our geographical location and because of a decision by the British in which we had no hand, act or part to leave the EU, we're somehow kind of shoehorned into a situation vis-a-vis the rest of the European Union, which puts us at a disadvantage. So that's essentially where we stand in terms of timeline. Effectively, we probably need to see some kind of agreement by early to mid-November, because this will be a treaty. The text has to be translated into every European language. Some parliaments insist that they will only look at texts, understandably, in their own languages. We're lucky as the English speakers, tends not to be a problem for us. And as well as that, the European Parliament has to approve this as well. So it's a very tight timescale, and the negotiations are taking place on a daily basis, alternating between London and Brussels. Things have been very tight recently. There's been very little, if you like, press spinning, propaganda, which suggests that probably the negotiations are quite serious. At least that's what we're assuming, and that's in sum is where we stand. I hope that's it kind of explains the high level background.
Definitely, and it shows that how much more work really there is to do. And I guess one of the concerns that we have, here among our members and friends is, again, the Good Friday Agreement. As you know, that the National Committee was involved initially in helping to get that going. And what I'm wondering is, I guess the border. The border is what kind of concerns us, because that's an integral part of the Good Friday Agreement. And given what you just laid out about, maybe controlling things at the ports, but is there concern is on both sides of the border that somehow the border will not remain open? I mean, do you have a commitment from London that, that there won't be some kind of a push to, to close the border?
Well, both this British government and the previous British government have said that they will respect the achievements, benefits and commitments of the peace process, which are of paramount importance from our point of view on the island of Ireland. And as I say, the protection of the Good Friday Agreement is an issue that we prioritise in our policy, even over our national economic policies. And in the first phase, when we ensured that the withdrawal agreement would respect there being no border, it's something of absolute crucial importance. And it would be disastrous if that were to be let slip, given what has been achieved over the last 20, indeed 30 years, given the preparatory work. We have had, I'll be honest, I think it's probably fair to say that the degree of understanding in Dublin, and I would also say in the United States, and I would say in Brussels, about the situation relating to the Good Friday Agreement is sometimes more developed than you would get in certain parts of Westminster. Mm-hmm. I think that from our point of view, we know the British system probably better than the British system knows us. We certainly know Northern Ireland, I think, better than Westminster knows Northern Ireland. And I'm often struck at how surprised British politicians are when they realize how important a role the United States played in bringing about the Good Friday Agreement, and are also surprised at the very substantial financial aid that the European Union gives and the US gives also to the peace process. So that's a sort of, in a sense, I'm not saying the peace process is a victim of its own success. What I am saying, it requires constant care and attention. It's extremely carefully balanced. It needs to be handled with great care. And there was, for example, in the early days of the negotiations in the first phase, there were views from Brexiteers who are close to the British government saying, well, it's okay, we can set up what they called alternative arrangements, which were essentially drones, which wouldn't go down well in communities on the border in Ireland. And we could have other kinds of electronic devices. And that was to misunderstand two things. Number one is the border between North and South is not simply a transactional border. It's something with a much more powerful resonance, and the transformative role in supporting peace on the withering away of the border, which was achieved not only because of the peace negotiations in the 1990s, but because we had a single market from 1992 and the UK was in the EU. That tends not to be understood among some of the Brexiteer community. And let me give you another example, and I think you might find this interesting. When we pointed out the negative effects of having infrastructure at the border, which would go down very badly with local communities, some of the Brexiteers said, well, it doesn't have to be at the border. It could be 5 or 10 miles away. Well, look at the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The height of the Troubles, there was never any infrastructure on the border because it wouldn't have been safe. But there was massive infrastructure 5 or 10 miles away. I remember I used to drive regularly from Dublin to Belfast. The main checkpoint was 5 miles north of the border near Newry, a place called Clohog. You had massive kind of watchtowers on either side of the road. And you had the busiest heliport in Western Europe, 5 miles further away, which was a British Army heliport called Bespoke Mill. Now, the very fact that Brexiteers could say that showed a profound lack of understanding of sort of the careful developments that had been nurtured, including by previous Conservative governments, John Major's government and then Tony Blair's government. So we had a bit of a knowledge issue that we had to grapple with. And I have to say that in Brussels, in the European Commission, there was an immediate and instant understanding of the sensitivities of this. And I think that was very important in moving things forward to come to a solution on the withdrawal agreement, which avoided a border north-south. The problem now for us is if there's no deal, the challenge will be how to ensure that the British side implement the withdrawal agreement, which stands whether or not there is a deal. The withdrawal agreement is a treaty, but given then we will have a situation with no kind of understanding of how that north-south arrangement is to be actually managed in detail. So a long answer to your question, but I thought it useful just to put that in a context.
Yeah, well, and it's a very important question. And I'd like to ask you one more question before we move to discussing EU-China, and that is your thoughts on, and I think this is a concern to especially those of us who support the Good Friday Agreement, you know, what are your thoughts on, or where are the standings on a US UK trade deal, and how would that affect, you know, the island of Ireland? And because I think that's a concern that especially members of the US Congress have, that they don't want to do anything that again would endanger the, you know, the Good Friday Agreement and peace on the island of Ireland.
Yeah, so let me say we in Ireland greatly appreciate both the interest and the support of US elected representatives and organizations like yourselves on the kind of the intricacies of the peace process. I think it's very clear, look, Vice President Biden has said it, Speaker Pelosi has said it, Chairman Neal has said it, many representatives have said it, both people I knew when I was in Washington several decades ago, and more recent people like Congressman Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, who's very vocal in a positive sense on this too, that I think it would be clear that a US-UK trade deal, it would be very difficult to conceive of how it could happen if violence was being done to the Good Friday Agreement, and the Good Friday Agreement was being damaged by the approach of the British government. I think that's clear. And I think Mick Mulvaney would not dissent from that either. I won't put words in his mouth, but I think he's been also kind of explicit on that on the record too. That's the question of a UK-US trade deal, and it's linked to the Brexit process. And it would be very, very important that the British understand that there would be consequences from complicating or cutting across or kind of weakening the Good Friday Agreement. The other point is, of course, a UK-US trade deal in its own lights. I wonder, a lot of talk is put out about a UK-US trade deal, but I know that the US are very tough negotiators in any event. And I could see a lot of issues in terms of the kind of things that a US trade negotiator would want in terms of agriculture, in terms of the health system, which is kind of essentially a socialized health system in the UK, as it is in much of the EU. Things like that. I mean, I just wonder, Susan, if I could flip the question. I think it's probably more likely that certainly if there's a change in administration after the US election, my own sense is there won't be any rushing to trade deals by a Biden administration. There are other things to deal with. But there was, going back 7 years, a very good start made to an EU-US trade agreement called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. Now, President Trump pulled the plug on that. But one of the kind of as assets of TTIP was that it, not so much on tariffs, but it was enabling the US and the EU to come together on standards and kind of level playing field issues. And in a sense, I was always struck at my own time in China that Chinese officials were always extremely nervous about TTIP. They didn't like it at all because the notion of the EU and the US kind of combining and on these important trade and level playing field and standards issue was something they didn't like. So long answer to your question, I think there's probably not going to be that much appetite either way for a UK-US trade deal. I could be wrong. If there's a new Trump administration, there may be a mini one. It would have to be mini to avoid congressional oversight. But in any event, there's a sort of sense that there are other issues out there at the moment that are probably more priority than trade deals. And now I say that with some impudence because I'm not a US citizen and I'm looking in from the outside, but that would be my own judgment.
Well, yeah, and I, at my last assignment in the Foreign Service, I served in Germany, and I remember actually President Obama coming, and TTIP was a big part of the discussion with German counterparts. But I think you've actually made a great segue for me to begin our discussion about EU-China relations and what you mentioned about perhaps China being a little bit nervous about the US and the EU having a strong trade relationship. But, I think as we've seen, US-China relations are not at a great point right now, and especially regarding trade and technology. And I think that that has caused some friction or disagreements among not just with the EU, but a lot of our friends and allies in Europe. So I'm wondering, where are we, or where is the European Union and China? Where are they on EU-China relations? I mean, are they getting stronger? Are they wavering? Are they weaker? And kind of what is the role? Because I think, to me, Brexit and then the COVID pandemic have been two factors that have really interfered with any kind of relationship among any countries in the world. So we'd be very interested, given your experience of living for many years in China, what your thoughts are on the EU-China relationship.
Thanks, Susan. Well, I think China has changed. Certainly, it's very different from the time I arrived in China as ambassador, which is 16 years ago, and it's different also. I left shortly after Xi Jinping became General Secretary and of the Communist Party, and things have obviously been changing. Then China in the early 2000s was still very much kind of inheriting the reforms that Jiang Zemin made in that Zhu Rongji made in the late 1990s on the structure of Chinese industry. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. China had these stratospheric growth rates. China was uncomfortable with these growth rates, even though they were stratospheric, and constantly would talk about the danger of unbalanced, uncoordinated, unstable, and unsustainable structure of their economy. They were going to retool and restructure the economy away from low added value, polluting growth, if you like, Nike runners, and also goods made for Western consumers. But the global financial crisis intervened. And the Chinese then probably destabilized their economy, despite the successes, a little more by having this big fiscal stimulus. That led to problems of indebtedness. And we know when Xi Jinping came in, he basically took a much more close controlling view of both the economy and the political structures in China. And I think the lessons of the overreach by the Soviet Union on reform in the 1980s was relevant. I can often remember that the word Gorbachev was not a word you would mention at all around Beijing. They just didn't like that. They saw the Gorbachev economic and political reforms in a more Western way, as meaning the end of communism in Europe, which it did. From an EU perspective, and I should simply mention that, Susan, to say that the EU had a kind of broad-ranging, sprawling relationship with China, which worked quite well, but it was very much process-driven. But that tended to change about 2 years ago, and a new approach was set out by the European Commission in early 2019. And essentially, that boiled down to a series of priority actions that the EU wanted to see China undertake in areas such as multilateralism, global issues, human rights, but also reciprocity, level playing field, market access. And to cut a long story short, the EU classed China in three, said it was something that responded to three classifications. First of all, China was a negotiating partner, particularly on global issues like climate. Mm-hmm. Secondly, China was an economic competitor, particularly on trade issues and technology, which you refer to. And third, China was a systemic rival promoting alternative models of governance. Now, the first outing for this new approach was a couple of months later at an annual EU-China summit around the early summer 2019. And the Chinese did not like the description of themselves as being a systemic rival. They didn't like it. And of course, it didn't appear in domestic Chinese media coverage, but again, there's no particular surprise about that. And the challenge for the EU since then has been essentially to continue to hold China to account for the commitments it has made. So the EU has become sharper, has become more sharp-elbowed, if I can say that, in vis-a-vis China. It's become more assertive. It certainly realizes that interdependence has become more conflictual. And the EU is also very much attached to protecting multilateralism as we know it, not the multilateralism as the Chinese leadership describe it, which in a sense is a kind of almost selective multilateralism with Chinese characteristics in a sense. And that has actually had some initially positive effects because there were certain progress in some areas, but we still have the issues of the trade problems, intellectual property, and all those kinds of issues. The European Union has been following up in a very practical way on some of those trade issues by legislation. Now, trade in the European Union is what's called a community competence. It's entirely a competence that the member states, through law and through the treaties, have entrusted to the Commission. So the Commission is working on some issues. There's been an investment screening regulation, which came into force last week, actually. It was approved by the Parliament. There's also an enforcement regulation, so the European Union can now retaliate in a kind of trade defense issues without waiting for the WTO because of the paralysis in the WTO. That's because the EU is a community of laws, so we need legislation to cover anything we do. There's a Commission white paper on foreign subsidies for affiliates in the EU. Now, we don't say whose affiliates, but essentially it's aimed at subsidies from state-owned enterprises. So you can be sure it's not American companies, none of whom are owned by the US state. The EU is also, in relation to the Chinese wish for a free trade agreement, said that we first need an EU-China investment agreement before we will move to a free trade agreement. That's where things stand, if you like, on the kind of programmatic interaction. It's a wake-up call. It has been a wake-up call to the European Union's vulnerabilities. And on COVID, definitely, COVID has been an accelerator of this. COVID has been an accelerator of the geopolitical trends. And I think the whole question of diversity of supply, the question of minimizing EU vulnerabilities has been important. Now, that's not uncomplicated because the EU will have to be very careful as it takes this forward that it doesn't fall into the trap of itself adopting protectionist or statist policies, if you like. I also should say that certainly it's not only China. There was one case where I think the US administration sought to buy a German vaccine company, which actually at the height of the crisis in the spring, which generated, certainly in Germany, quite a lot of unhappiness. But in sum, Susan, that's where the European Union is going on China. I'll stop there. If you want me to talk about the possibility of US-EU cooperation on China, I can do that, but I'll be in your hands on that.
Well, yeah, I actually would like to do that, but before that, maybe just in looking at the state of play in Europe regarding China, one thing that concerns Washington, and I think a lot of people in the United States, is China's Belt and Road Initiative. And we've noticed, and again, it's focused not so much on trade, but infrastructure projects. And we've noticed that the Belt and Road Initiative has arrived in Europe. Not to be cavalier about it, but Italy has joined the initiative. Greece and Croatia have received, substantial infrastructure investments, and even some of your neighbors, whether they're the Eastern European members of the EU or your near neighbors, are being involved in these kind of investments. And I'm just wondering how that impacts, and do you see that as having positive, negative? Because on the one hand, just, to give, my personal point of view is that US is probably not happy that countries have been involved or get involved in the Belt and Road, but, we haven't really come up with some alternative. So to saying, oh, don't get involved because we can do X together. So I'm just wondering, how do people in Brussels and, other countries in the EU feel about some of the members becoming part of the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, I think the Belt and Road Initiative, and also something else called I think it's now called the 17+1, which involves a number of Central Eastern European members and non-members of the EU and China. They're not exactly blooming. They're not delivering quite what the ballyhoo and the headlines said they would at the start. On investment in the EU, I think it's ironic, but I mention it, that the largest location of Chinese foreign direct investment is I think the UK. But again, that's one of the interesting ironies.
You're not part of the EU now, so you don't have to worry about that.
Well, they're in transition till the end of the year. So, let me just say, the 17+1 actually developed, I think it was called 16+1, developed while I was in China. And one of the reasons for it, we were never involved in it because we are geographically kind of in a different space, and we were not looking for big infrastructural investment. But part of the motive for the 16+1 was a sense by some of the Central European states that they were not getting, they were being a little bit excluded from the great blooming German-China relationship. Germany at the time was hoovering up huge deals. The German government was going out every year to have a meeting with the Chinese State Council in different cities around China. There was the German-Chinese Year of Culture, the German-Chinese Decade of something else. And there was certainly it was quite noticeable and vocal even that some of the neighboring states wanted to be part of this. I think the Chinese spotted this. And I think that's what kind of drove the 16 and now 17+1. Again, I'm not sure just how successful it's been. And you mentioned Greece. And I'll tell you a rather interesting little event that occurred about 3 years ago. Shortly after President Macron became president, he brought to a summit meeting of the European leaders in June 2017 a proposal for investment screening. Now, it had not gone through the normal preparation, and it was something which Ireland, the Nordic countries, Netherlands, the free trade countries didn't like, because, I mean, let me be frank, there is no way that we would ever agree to any screening of US investments in Ireland. Let me put it like that. And so it wasn't made absolutely clear it was aimed at China, but it foundered not because of, if you like, the free trade Northern Europeans, the Dutch ourselves, the Nordics. It foundered because the Greek and Portuguese prime ministers both objected to it and reminded France and Germany that kind of a number of years earlier, 7 years earlier, when they were in a financial crisis, as indeed were we, and when the so-called troika of the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF were essentially running their economies, they were pressured to divest themselves of state assets. So, and one state asset that was bought by the Chinese was the port of Piraeus, right, in Athens, bought by Costco, a big state-owned enterprise. And in the case of Portugal, it was a large minority stake in the Portuguese electricity grid, which I think was acquired by Three Gorges Dam, which is another Chinese state-owned enterprise. But the Greek and Portuguese prime ministers just again reacted, noting the irony that some years before they'd basically been told to sell the crown jewels, and now they were being there was this sort of investment screening thing that was being put in. I think that goes, Susan, to the complexity of this issue, that it's not a simple black and white kind of question, that there is now an investment screening regulation, which all member states have signed up to. And this kind of requires, I think, careful analysis and consideration. But again, my sense is that Belt and Road Initiative, and I think the Italians have also, if I'm not mistaken, got a bit cool on this as well. I think the Belt and Road Initiative and the 17+1 are not kind of thriving in the floodlights that they were originally announced in.
Yeah, well, and I think you brought up a really good point, at least for me. I lived for 4 years in Greece, and you kind of highlighted I could say maybe the dilemma that, countries can have, and if they need, you said EU, asked Greece to divest, and so they kind of did what they needed to do when they were in a financial crisis, and then they have to face the repercussions of that. But I think that brings me to one of the most important questions I want to ask you, and I would just say before I get into that I notice we've had several people join who weren't here at the beginning when I mentioned about questions. So if anyone does want to ask a question, you can go to the lower right-hand corner of your screen and put it in the Q&A box. But that said, one of the things, and I'll just say that, having been a U.S. diplomat, served a lot of my career in Europe and former Soviet Union, I really value the relationships that we have with our allies in Europe, with the EU. So I would say I'm, at heart, a multilateralist. And what I have been thinking about is, and a lot of the discussions I think we have, because we do a lot through our Forum on Asia-Pacific Security, interact with, Chinese scholars and experts and others in Asia. But, what could the US and Europe, the European Union and others do jointly in their approach to China in a way that perhaps could maximize positive outcomes? And I'm not saying that we get together and we punish China, but are there ways that we can work together? Because I think together we're stronger. And if there are issues, especially if there are issues that not just in trade and infrastructure, but even on human rights and other kinds of things that I think concern us as citizens of, democracies. And I think that's one thing that makes us stronger. So what would be your ideas or suggestions that you might have where the US and the EU could work together to have some positive outcomes in our approach to China, rather than, what I guess last time I was in Europe, I was in Sweden and I saw these signs for Huawei, and it made me concerned because I thought, well, there's a potential rift that we have. But are there ways we could work together to have a strong approach to China that, hopefully would be a win-win for all?
Okay, Susan, I think that's an excellent question. I think on the China and 5G issue, I think that things are kind of developing on that recently, as I'm sure you've seen. You mentioned Sweden. and Huawei. And the European, even though telecoms is not a community competence, primarily member states have cooperated with the European Commission to draw up kind of tools and toolboxes to try and enhance cybersecurity in the European Union and to kind of address the kinds of questions that you've mentioned. However, again, the limit of that is when anything is asked or proposed that is seen as cutting across EU autonomy, which is a sort of a legal kind of concept in the treaty. And secondly, I mean, if I could say, I think the US and the European Union should certainly be speaking more all the time and should be speaking, and I agree with you, we should be talking more on China, but the starting point should be recommitting to multilateralism. And I think it's fair to say, and I don't think I'm saying anything controversial, when I say it in the last few years, the last 3 years or so, the US administration has moved away from multilateralism, has taken a much more unilateral approach across a range of issues, and these all impact in the European Union. I think the approach of the administration to the European Union, which is kind of, in a sense, at the rhetorical level at least, hostile, the support for Brexit that's come from the White House, the attacks on NATO, which have had a really profound effect on the attitudes of some long-standing European allies, the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, the withdrawal from the World Health Organization, and, if you like, what I said earlier, the pulling the plug on TTIP. I think those inevitably, whether even though we wouldn't like them to be parts of the context, they are parts of the context in terms of trying to move forward on developing the cooperation on China. Now, the EU Foreign Policy High Representative is very conscious of this, and he's tried to move things forward. And he recently proposed a high-level dialogue with Secretary Pompeo on China. Now, obviously, from an EU perspective, we would want to see, I mean, I'm not speaking, I don't work for him, but I'm sure he would say this, that Mr. Borrell would like to see that develop, you know, whatever administration is elected in a few weeks or months' time. And the European Union also wants to work with other like-minded countries too. So yes, I think the EU, and I think this dialogue might be good in finding out ways in which the EU and US could be worked together. But what I would say is that if it is used by, if you like, the US side or the current US administration as basically a stick to hit the Chinese over the head with, I think the EU would want to see something more than that, would want to see a kind of it being done on a rules-based approach, multilateral approach, respecting the WTO, using the WTO, unfreezing the WTO, and also responding to global norms and standards on issues such as human rights. I mean, obviously, Hong Kong, Xinjiang are two cases. But I think, and I'm speaking, even though I'm kind of out of it now, my own sense is, knowing as I do the European Union will not want to be caught in the crossfire of US-China tensions. It will not agree to any proposals to decouple, to have a rupture in relations with China, simply because 21st century China is not the same as mid to late 20th century Soviet Union, and China's kind of interdependence and penetration, although conflictual, is inevitable and very important. And again, I think the EU will start from the notion, and I think you said this yourself in your question to me, that there would be a need to partner on global issues, climate change, issues such as that, kind of be rigorous on trade, and to push very much our conception of governance. Let me just, if I may, Susan, just quote something that the German defense minister said in a speech in Frankfurt just a few days ago. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, AKK as she's known for short. She made a rather interesting speech, and Germany is a country which is a crucially influential country in the EU on this. She said, we support multilateralism, we support the WTO, we have the closest relationship with the US, to whom we feel great gratitude. But we see two threats to trade. One is Chinese state capitalism on the one hand, and the other is a policy of isolation and decoupling. So my answer to you is yes, there should be much more interaction between the US and the EU on challenges generally, but specifically on China. But again, I think probably there needs to be some kind of shared understanding of how that would be taken forward. Again, if I'm not speaking out of turn, I suspect that shared understanding would probably be much more extensive if there were to be a Biden administration. But again, I don't want to interfere in US politics. And again, the other point I'll say, I don't see any going back to the status quo ante, because China has changed. And I think China has become a much greater challenge in recent years than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
So if you could throw me out if I've spoken over the lines.
No, not at all. In fact, it's interesting for me to kind of hear from our friends and allies in other countries, what they see. In fact, I had a friend the other day who has family live in Norway, and they wanted to talk about something, and they say, oh, no, we're just focused on the US elections. So clearly we're getting a lot of thought and, publicity around the world. But we've had two questions, and I'm going to kind of combine, and it just goes along with what we discussed. And I think you have pointed out about the importance of looking for ways that, that we don't just denounce China just to denounce China, but that we look for ways that we could all work positively together. However, are you seeing, among the member states, sort of a feeling that China is too aggressive in its wolf warrior diplomacy, or, putting aside, say, trade and climate, but what about saying something about the South China Sea? Are there ways that we could make, or human rights in Xinjiang and are there ways that we could positively, as all, strong democracies, work together, other than in the trade and obviously the 5G area? Because I think that was the two questions we had were, is there some difference of opinion or dissent among the EU nations, which leads to, and I might as well give the third one because we're almost out of time, but it goes to then, is there, there's been a lot of discussion about in the EU, because it's a consensus vote. And, given the concerns about what I've just mentioned, and not only China, but, concerns about Russia's activities on your eastern flank and elsewhere in the Mediterranean. Do you think that that the EU is, considering or would ever consider going from a policy by consensus to more of, I guess I would call it majority rule. And those would kind of go together, because if you do have a split, among how the approach to China, the approach to Russia, how would you see that playing out as we move forward?
Okay, thanks, Susan. Yeah, I think I've been speaking about trade and a little bit, very slightly on 5G, and I've spoken about the global issues too, but haven't kind of unpacked them. Yeah, I think it is very important that that the EU be vocal on human rights questions. A number of member states, including my own, have suspended extradition agreements with Hong Kong on foot of the national security law. There have, as you know, been differences of opinion in some UN bodies in relation to Chinese human rights issues that have come up. And that goes to your point about majority voting or qualified majority voting. But I think it's worth just recalling that the last time that our leaders, the heads of state and government of the European Union, discussed China, which was less than a month ago, was at the EU summit, the European Council of the 1st and 2nd of October. They were united on trade, and trade, of course, is a community competence. But at the highest level, they said explicitly and clearly that there must be a rebalancing, calling on China to deliver on their commitments, encouraging China to take more responsibility on global challenges, climate, COVID, and debt relief in Africa, something which is a counterbalance to a Belt and Road Initiative, underline their serious concern at human rights, and specifically Hong Kong and treatment of minorities, which of course decodes as Xinjiang. And this has been conveyed to Chinese leaders, which it was at the summit meeting earlier, the video summit meeting early in the year. So yes, at the highest level, there is, I think, a broad convergence and consensus of approach. It tends to become a little more messy when you get into specifics lower down the food chain, and there are differences of emphasis. But I just mentioned that because I think that's probably not widely known, and that was a public communique, and that would have been digested in Beijing. On the question of voting and qualified majority voting, that's an old chestnut, if you like, in the EU. There already is majority voting in some foreign policy questions. Without being technical, let me just mention it that under the treaty, Article 31, I think, the European Council, the heads of government of the EU, can decide by unanimity to extend majority voting to issues of foreign policy, except for military issues, because just like in NATO, there's no agreement in the EU ever to depart from consensus on military or defense implications. And the Commission did about 2 years ago come forward with a proposal to trial this in 3 areas which had been difficult, where problems that you've identified had occurred. And as I say, this has been going on for a while. One was on the application of EU sanctions against countries with human rights problems. The second one was on human rights positions at the UN, for example. And the third one was the launching of civil EU missions in Africa. It didn't travel, it didn't work. A number of countries who strongly lament the fact that consensus has stopped the EU taking positions, at the same time saw greater danger in departing from consensus, moving into majority voting. I think that's an important point, and I think the lesson from that is that while consensus, it is frustrating that positions can't be taken because of the consensus rule. Majority voting would have many drawbacks and would probably weaken the European Union by accentuating the divisions. So that's an imperfect situation. It's an imperfect world, unfortunately. I think the key thing is the EU needs to continue to build consensus on the key challenges. The European Union is quite good at building consensus. Sometimes it takes time. And as I say, there's a surprising degree of consensus at the highest level among the leaders of the EU. It's, I suppose, when you get further down into the minutiae and the details, things are more difficult to achieve. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just wanted to set that out as a perspective.
And actually some more questions have come up, but I see we're out of time, so I won't pose them, but they're questions related to EU and your approach to Russia. And of course, what's the effect of the JCPOA and how the Middle East and Iran. So that means, and plus I have a lot more questions about Northern Ireland and your thoughts on that, having served in Belfast. So it means that we're going to have to invite you back for another program. But I want to thank you again, Declan, for a fantastic hour that has flown by and really covered all the bases. And at least for me, I've got a much better understanding of where the EU is in terms of the Brexit agreement, how it affects Northern Ireland, and the approach to China. So thank you again very, very much. And I look forward to more discussions in the future.